Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Conflict to Profit, Building a Conflict Management System for Small Business. My name is Sylvie Lessard, and I am with the CFIB. Before we begin, I do have a few housekeeping items for you. First of all, you'll notice that you have a control panel where there is a questions box section. We encourage you to type in your questions at any time that you think of them during the webinar, so that we can address them during the Q&A towards the end. If we don't get to your question, please don't worry, we will follow up with you. Now, if you don't see the panel, please look for an orange arrow and click on it. This should bring it back up. I will be monitoring this part of the platform throughout the session. If you're having trouble hearing, please ensure you've chosen phone call under audio instead of computer. Also, in the control panel under handouts, if you'd like a copy of what we'll be reviewing today, and there's also a couple of other tools that our presenter will be referring to. You just need to click on handout. It'll display the list of available documents. You click on the document and save it to your computer. Next, I want you to know that you'll be receiving an email either today or tomorrow that will include a link to today's recorded session. And finally, please note there will be a survey once the webinar ends. We encourage you to enter in all the feedback that you want. And finally, here we are now. Here's the reason that we're all here. We're thrilled to welcome Michael Walker, President and Head Coach of Legendary Coaching, to present this webinar. Michael is an influential leader who looks for opportunities to add value to people. He believes everybody has untapped potential, and most of us have a desire to unlock and engage this potential as we experience the adventure of life and achieve success that matters. Part of that success for Michael looks like empowering leaders to lead themselves and others as well. Prosperity in every area of life that they can't wait to give away to others. Michael is a recognized leadership and business advisory coach within an exceptionally diverse range of businesses and organizational sectors. In addition, he holds the following qualifications and designations. He's a qualified QMed mediator with the ADR Institute of Canada, an analyst WFA with the Workplace Fairness Institute of Canada, as well as an independent complaints facilitator, ICF, Ontario Ministry of Health. So without further ado, I will now turn it over to Michael.
Thank you very much, Sylvie. And on behalf of Legendary Coaching and CFIB, thank you for taking this time and joining us today. This webinar will provide you with a fresh perspective on conflict, both healthy and unhealthy. A look at how conflict impacts you and your organization, and some immediately applicable steps that will, as our title suggests, turn conflict into profit. I know that's kind of crazy talk, but stick with me. I've got some stuff that might change your thinking on that. Every registrant was provided in advance a diagnostic from us through CFIB titled Workplace Wellness Survey. We will be unpacking the results of that survey during the webinar. If you didn't have an opportunity to receive that or to do that, don't worry. You'll be able to do it after the information you'll have from the webinar. You'll be able to apply to that, and it'll be very useful for you in seeing where you are and seeing where your organization is. We also will be giving you access to another diagnostic following the webinar that will help you better understand your personal conflict capacity, as well as we're going to give you some tools around that to help you increase that. So that's kind of the overview. Let's jump in, and I want to throw out 3 words: assess, eliminate, and empower. We're going to unpack actionable takeaways today, including 1, how to assess your workplace to find any issues; 2, how to eliminate and manage the fear of conflict. This is a big deal, and we're going to be looking at that fairly closely; and 3, how a conflict management system can engage, empower, and inspire you and your organization. So let me start by asking you 3 questions. The first question is conflict for you or your organization more often seen as a problem rather than an opportunity? 2, is conflict a significant cost to you and your organization in terms of people, time, and money? And 3, is your conflict management system a proactive part of your business plan or a reactive response to your arguably uncomfortableness or fear with conflict? If you answered yes to 1, 2, or all 3 of these questions, then you're going to love this next hour we have together. As we get started, I'd like you, though, to take a moment right now and to think about the last time you were part of a conflict, whether you were actively involved in it or you were just simply observing it. And when that conflict became uncomfortable. You know what I mean? 2 questions. The first question, what were you feeling? Were you feeling anxious? Were you feeling fear? Were you feeling attacked? Were you feeling loss of control? Were you feeling escalating? Were you feeling unfair? Were you feeling threatening, hurt, anger? Well, from what I've heard others say when we've done this webinar and workshop is that these are the kind of words that most of us feel when that conflict becomes uncomfortable. Second question, what was it that made it uncomfortable for you? Was it how someone was talking to you or others talking to each other? Was it how the conversation was escalating? Was it how it was like no one was listening to each other, just trying to make their point or win a position? Or was it how there didn't seem to be any way to slow this thing down? It was like a runaway freight train. Or that this conflict was going to cause some serious damage to people and arguably profit. We're going to look at how emotions can easily set us up for a poor outcome when we let them drive the bus. We're going to look at the whys of the uncomfortableness or fear of conflict and how a conflict management system and some new tools can help turn that ship around. Now, I was told that there are 2 things in life that are inevitable and unavoidable. Arguably, as the picture shows, death and taxes. Well, I'm here to say that that's not true. There's actually 4 things in life that are inevitable and unavoidable: death, taxes, change, and conflict. But uniquely different from death and taxes, change and conflict do not have to be fatal and costly. They can actually be fun. Yes, I said it. They can actually be fun and they can be profitable. I know it's crazy talk, but what if it's not crazy? What if I'm onto something? What if there's something here for us that turns conflict into profit? With conflict, I often describe it as a system that is perfectly designed to achieve the results we're getting. And often those results we're getting are not so great. You know, if we think of an assembly line and every 4th car coming off the assembly line is missing its right front wheel, all the pointing at it, the wringing of hands and worry, all the belief that time will heal all wounds, that we could just wait. And if we don't change the outcome, something's going to change the system by some kind of amazing miracle power. Well, it's not going to happen until we actually change the system. Or in this case, we're talking about when we actually change or implement a conflict management system. Conflict in and of itself is actually not the problem. It's actually people. It's actually you and me. It's how we choose to engage or empower it. For as the saying goes, as superheroes, for good or evil. Conflict is simply a catalyst for differing ideas, beliefs, and positions, and how they are resolved or allowed to become toxic. In other words, we can let conflict take us hostage, or we can be intentional, pay attention to that word, about engaging and empowering it. One thing we know for sure, that when conflict is left to its own devices, it will become a growing liability and certainly not an asset. We all know that, and your answers to those 3 questions I posed at the outset certainly probably reinforce this understanding. Okay, so let's jump into a conversation around the characteristics of conflict, since it's going to be a fundamental part of our conflict management system, and see what we can uncover that will help you build a healthy conflict management system. So right out of the bat, let's just talk about that there's 2 types of conflict. Most of you know this, but there's healthy and there's unhealthy conflict. And let's dig into unhealthy conflict first. Now that picture speaks 1,000 words, doesn't it? None of you have ever been like that, right? Of course not. It's those other people that have. Well, I suspect we've all had a moment like this athlete, that our emotions and behavior come together to create a perfect storm that activates that system that is perfectly designed to achieve the results we're about to get. It would be safe to say that this behavior would be a catalyst for unhealthy conflict and result in some very unwanted consequences. You know what I mean? But here's a question for you. From your experience with the conflict, thinking back about one that made you uncomfortable, when it becomes unhealthy like this, what are the consequences that we most likely are going to see? Well, I've got a list of them. Let's unpack them. The first one is unhealthy conflict destroys relationships. I mean, what is our greatest asset? People, we would say, yet we often let conflict drive a wedge between our people, ourselves, and our organizations. Unhealthy conflict decreases physical wellness, while stress at appropriate levels helps us resolve life's three tensions: creativity, communication, and legacy. Too much stress, and in particular emotional stress, can weaken the immune system, cause high blood pressure, fatigue, depression, anxiety, even heart disease. Unhealthy conflict blocks emotional fairness. Legal and governmental fairness is regulated by prescribed actions, while emotional fairness is often left to fend for itself, making way for our past experiences to guide our reactions and behaviors, even when they have nothing to do with the current situation. Unhealthy conflict undermines self-determination. How great would it be if everybody, including you and me, we get to go home and feel good about how we handled ourselves and each other? Unhealthy conflict strips that away, and the lack of self-determination muzzles empowered conversations. Unhealthy conflict reinforces fear. You know, we know 8 out of 10 leaders have a fear of conflict, and 90% of employees have seen negative conflict escalate in their workplace. What a perfect platform to give fear a place to win. Unhealthy conflict shuts down creativity and innovation. When unhealthy conflict is left to its own devices, most organizations default to their transactional space, and performance drives relationships. This will result in people not feeling valued and heard, which is the #1 reason people leave organizations, and will ultimately shut down creativity and innovation. And finally, unhealthy conflict reduces profitability. Unhealthy conflict brings out short-sighted decisions that usually looks like making a new rule to avoid dealing with the underlying issue that often decreases engagement and increases cost. Or it looks like a choice that undermines the values of the organization and consequently the people. I think of Volkswagen lying to its customer, and integrity is one of their values. Resolving unhealthy conflict. You know, we're going to dig into that a little bit, and we're going to look at just how it gets started. But however, before I do that, I want to remind you that conflict must be resolved. I mentioned it before, but we can't apply that theory that time heals all wounds and wait for everything to settle down. It won't. In fact, what happens is we create what is known as latent or unseen conflict. Most of the conflict that we deal with in the workplace is what we call manifest or seen conflict. Manifest conflict is what statistics tell us our managers spend 42% of their time dealing with. Latent conflict is the true cancer of conflict, as it embeds itself into our people until one day it explodes. And you'll know what I mean when I say loudly and we lose people and profit. You've either seen that or been part of it. Or quietly, and that one person we thought was going to be with us forever is suddenly gone. All of this occurs inside our conflict management system, whether we know it or not. Each of us and every organization has a conflict management system, and to the extent which we are aware of it will dictate how well it is working for us or arguably not. Okay, so unhealthy conflict, not good. A lot of things going on there, a lot of moving parts. But let's look at that second type of conflict and talk about healthy conflict for a bit. Here's the cool thing, is healthy conflict is real and it is highly profitable. Yes, it is. It can be highly profitable. Healthy conflict has an underlying principle that a healthy bottom line is the sum of an organization and its people's best parts. What is that sum? It's about protecting relationships. It's about advancing physical wellness and emotional fairness. It's about empowering pride of ownership, and it's about being highly profitable. That's what healthy conflict can drive. Healthy conflict benefits? Well, we've got a list of them. We know it protects relationships. What if we actually offered a system that reinforced every day the plaque on the wall that says people are our greatest asset? What if we had a conflict management system that fairly protected both the transactional space, which is what we do and how we do it, and the relational space, which is who we are and why we matter, And in doing so, brought the creative space to the forefront, the creative space where innovation and productivity and engagement and profitability reside. Healthy conflict increases physical wellness. The biggest impact right out of the gate is reduced absenteeism and presenteeism days. People not there and others who are there in the body, but that's about it. Then comes engagement and productivity. Healthy conflict advances emotional fairness. Just imagine a workplace where you could passionately disagree with someone or something, but no one takes it personally, and the system keeps principles and personalities in their own lanes. Healthy conflict reinforces self-determination. In a culture where trust both ways, empowerment and confidence thrive, self-determination will be embraced, and healthy conflict is actually the catalyst. Healthy conflict repositions fear. Healthy conflict is kind of like that principle of judo. The idea is not to take on the opposing energy of the person across from you, but to help move it to where you want it to go. Fear is taking on that energy, which has the bad habit of knocking us down. But curiosity, we're going to talk a little more on that in a bit, curiosity sets fear aside and moves the conflict, or the energy in this case, to a healthy place that can facilitate a healthy conversation. Wouldn't that be nice? Healthy conflict maximizes creativity and innovation. You know, in today's business climate, as I describe it, is kind of trying to frack our people for more. I'd like to suggest it's more about fostering an inclusive culture of prosperity that would engage, empower, and inspire each and all of us. Through a healthy conflict management system, we go after prosperity, or the Greek root of that is prosperos, or wholeness or wellness of one. Prosperity that fosters financial, relational, physical, and legacy needs. And finally, healthy conflict reduces the cost of conflict. You know, we know the cost of conflict in an organization starts at approximately $3,500 per employee, just simply based on absenteeism research, and goes up from there when we look at presenteeism that is arguably 3 times higher than absenteeism. Then we start talking about increased attrition and replacement costs, restructuring costs, manager and HR time, and productivity and reputation costs. Conflict is expensive, and healthy conflict is a huge benefit. So, empowering healthy conflict. Well, the culmination of all these healthy conflict benefits are the catalyst for a powerful shift in what we call that place of good trust, confidence, empowerment. The 3 key ingredients of outcome that we're looking for in a healthy conflict management system. It's where we go from these safe ideas to these great ideas, where we go from best practices to next practices. We go from cautious conversations to courageous ones. But to do that, what we really have to stop and look at before we even start digging into that is this whole issue of fear. And we really need to identify the fear of conflict. To be able to resolve unhealthy conflict and empower healthy conflict, we need to identify and understand the fear of conflict. In fact, we need to engage the fear of conflict. Think of that judo analogy. We need to separate fear from conflict and then unpack that fear and how it affects us and our conflict management systems. We need to remember what I mentioned earlier, that this is a big deal based on the statistics that we're told. There is huge risk and liability to allowing fear and unhealthy conflict to manifest in our organizations. What I said already, 8 out of 10 employees have a fear of conflict, or leaders, have a fear of conflict. The statistics, 9 out of 10 employees have experienced a conflict that has negatively escalated. You know, there's an argument that these statistics don't even need to exist. In fact, we could harness fear in a way that we could totally engage those elements completely differently. But there's a process to getting there. And arguably, what we would say that there's 2 pathways to fear. In most sports where some type of ball is involved, we have a decision to make at some point in the game or match. Should I go short or should I go long? You know what I mean? The same is true with fear, when we can go short or we can go long. Kind of let me explain what that looks like. There's a picture in front of you. They're just going to give you a second to absorb. There's a lot of color and parts on that. It's obviously a profile of a brain. And I'm going to talk to you about the thalamus, the hippocampus, the amygdala, and 2 roots. Let me draw your attention to the turquoise shape highlighted in the center of the brain. It's called the thalamus. The thalamus is our radar system. It picks up all external activities that are around us. Now take note of that red almond-shaped object called the amygdala. The amygdala is our alarm system. It sends out an alarm response based on the information it has. Now let me point you to that green oblong shape called the hippocampus. The hippocampus is our database. It stores all past information, good or bad. It also is what the amygdala accesses to decide on the alarm signal that would be required. Finally, you'll note that there is a long route and a short route displayed. The short route goes directly from the thalamus, our radar system, to the amygdala, our alarm system. The long route goes from the thalamus, again from our radar system, through the prefrontal cortex, that's where our reasoning goes on, and then to the amygdala, our alarm system. Where we engage the fear of conflict is in our choice of the long or the short route. This is really significant, huge in the workplace, and huge for us as leaders to understand. So there's two routes and there's two choices. And what's in front of you now is a kind of my abbreviated version of the brain and the whole process to make it works for me. It makes it a little simpler. But suppose you're walking down the street one night and a person ran up to you and robbed you. Very traumatic, right? A few days later in another city, someone starts running towards you and your heart begins to pound. A few weeks later, on a bright sunny afternoon, you pass the place where you were actually robbed and you start to feel sick. What just happened? Well, you have just engaged your short route to assess fear. The thalamus, your radar, picked up an external activity and went right to the database, the hippocampus, and got information. Running in one situation and environment in the other. And based on one piece of historical information, set off your fear alarm. But looking at the same situation, we can also see the long route. When you were in that different city and a person came running towards you, you felt fear. But then they ran by and the fear began to lift. Why? When in the middle of the day you suddenly feel sick when you're back where you were robbed and that sense of sickness begins to dissipate. Why? What happens is your thalamus, again, sends out the radar information to both the amygdala directly, that's the short route, and also via the prefrontal cortex, which is the long route, and then back to the amygdala. Remember, the prefrontal cortex is where our reasoning occurs. In the long route, the prefrontal cortex receives the radar report, then gathers sufficient information. This is the big deal, because it's not just one piece of information from the past, it's sufficient information from the database, the hippocampus, to provide what would be called a reasoned response. What has happened on the long route, which takes a fraction of a second longer to arrive at the alarm bell, your amygdala, is there is enough information available to mitigate the danger and not activate the alarm bell and turn it off. Oh, they're just running to the bus, and the fear lifts. It's the middle of the day, for goodness sakes, not nighttime, and there's a policeman standing right beside me and 3 police cruisers, and the sickness goes. We have a choice to just go with the short route or wait and see what the long route comes up with. Imagine you're in a conversation that is getting heated. The other person, they point their finger at you, and you suddenly have that fear appears, and you can feel your body getting flushed or tense, or you feel anxiousness, or however you react to that fear. Your body will send out a physical alarm system. What just happened? Your short route gathered one fact, that you were pointed at like that 20 years ago when your coworker did that same thing to you, and it didn't turn out well. Well, you are now operating with a fear of conflict that has nothing to do with that person before you, who's not pointing their finger with any malice. They just happen to be doing the same thing that is just getting that piece of data and reminding you 20 years ago, this is something you need to be afraid of. That fear is what informs an unhealthy conflict management system. That fear will usually trigger an unhealthy conflict and the associated emotions and behaviors. So how can we be intentional? There's that word again. I really encourage you to keep in mind of that word, intentional. So how can we be intentional with engaging our long route and therefore begin designing a healthy conflict management system? Well, whoever just asked that question, excellent question. I'm glad you asked because I'm going to go ahead and answer it. So armed with the knowledge that there is a short and a long route in terms of assessing the fear factor, and the longer route serves us better, clearly, what could we do differently? Pause. If you're sitting with somebody right now, turn to them, look at them and say, I'm going to pause. If you're just looking at yourself, hold your hand up and look at yourself, say, I'm going to pause. It's about being intentional to pause. Meaning intentional, I'm going to do something different with this right now. The next time it happens, I'm going to be ready with this, and I'm going to pause. I'm going to be intentional pause. It's about being intentional with pausing, even though our short route assessment is ringing the alarm bell. Our experience is that the most powerful pause comes in the form of a simple question. It's so hard to do it when you're in the moment. You all know what I'm talking about. But we need to create space for that. We need to pause to ponder. And the question, two words that just set this up, that just allow us to make that shift is what? I wonder. Why am I feeling so much fear of that? I wonder. I wonder why am I, or I wonder why they are so passionate about this. I wonder. Our passion will reveal our choices, and our choices help reveal where our common interests are. The power of I wonder is that it draws out impressions, not opinions. It helps de-escalate conversations by going from positions to interests. It helps keep principles and personalities in their own lanes. One of the greatest skills of a leader is curiosity. That's about being intentional, about being curious before expectations that start with ourselves. So often we're curious after the expectations that sometimes leads to judgment or opinion or something else. Curiosity is a powerful building block for increasing the empowerment, confidence, and trust of a team in a healthy organization. Remember, those are the three ingredients that we're looking for that come through a conflict management system that build a healthy organization: confidence, trust, and empowerment. It's where people go from those good ideas to the great ideas, from those safe conversations I mentioned earlier to the courageous ones. And probably most importantly, from me conversations to we conversations. Curiosity is critical for a healthy conflict management system. Curiosity is the fuel for implementing a self-help conflict management system. A self-help conflict management system fueled by curiosity will increase empowerment, confidence, and trust all day long. Now let me tell you two stories that will illustrate these concepts. Let me start with the story at the lunchroom. One day a manager called an employee in and asked them to go and paint the lunchroom. So the employee went off and painted the lunchroom, got the tools together, painting and what have you, and off, then came back the next day and said, manager, got the lunchroom all painted. The manager and the employee went down to the lunchroom to have a look, and they walked into this lunchroom, and the manager just stopped hard in his track, looked up and went, what is this mess? I have never seen such a mess of colors and stripes and pinks and greens and oranges, splotches. I said, are you an idiot? What is this? I asked you to paint the lunchroom. I'm turning this into an amusement park. And you know our corporate colors are blue and gray. Okay, well, that would be one way to approach it. Let's roll that back. And the manager and the employee are walking down to the painted lunchroom. And they walk in. Manager looks at the room and goes, whoa. Well, I didn't expect that. I mean, the word that kind of jumps out for me is eclectic. That's quite an amazing color scheme, and I guess whatever that. I just have one question for you, really. I'm just curious. I wonder why you're passionate about this color scheme. And the employee says, oh, thank goodness. I was sure I was going to get fired for doing this because I know our corporate colors are blue and gray. But, you know, I knew I couldn't paint this lunchroom on my own. I went and talked to the rest of the team. And I said, what would we like the space to feel like, look like, that we come in for a break or for lunch, kind of get refreshed, revitalized, get energized, and just be more pumped and more excited about being able to make a difference in this company in our next half of the day or after break. Very different outcomes. The absence of curiosity in the first one undermined empowerment, confidence, and trust. The presence of curiosity did exactly the opposite. Every organization consists of three spaces: transactional, relational, and creative. When the transactional and relational spaces work together, they activate the creative space. And that's where creativity is, innovation, engagement, productivity, and prosperity exist. When these three spaces work together, they facilitate the desired outcome of a healthy conflict management system, which its key ingredients, as I've mentioned numerous times, is empowerment, confidence, and trust. When the transactional and relational space are in conflict, they smother the creative space and its capacity to thrive. The lunchroom story provides evidence in the first response of what happens when it's all transactional, which is about what you do and how you do it or not. In the first scenario, it undermined empowerment. Would that employee ever think about taking initiative in the future? No. It destroyed confidence. Anything the employee does moving forward will contain an emotional message that they aren't valued and heard and lead to less confidence. It eroded trust, the key ingredient of any organization, and a sense by the employee of, like, what's the real motive here? And then the employee's experience becomes latent conflict. That deadly cancer of every organization starts rounding up people to go his way and ensures a compound negative consequence at some later point. Now, the second response I shared provides the exact opposite when the relational space leads, which is who we are and why we matter. It increased empowerment. How likely is this employee to be innovative and engaged and creative moving forward? Pretty darn high. It knocked confidence out of the park. They took initiative by engaging and empowering the team in the color scheme and went ahead and did something that ultimately unexpectedly delighted the company. Wouldn't you just love that to be in your company? It built trust of all those involved in the decision towards each other, the manager and the company, and created a mechanism to reinforce trust, because that story is going to get told over and over and over again and be part of the vision cast about how this company unexpectedly delights its people and its purpose and its vision. Curiosity without expectations opened up the opportunities for a very different lunchroom, wouldn't you say? My second story is about the orange. Now imagine that there's two people sitting at a table and there's one orange, and both of them indicate they want the orange. What can they do? Well, if I could hear you, I'd hear some of you say, well, cut it in half. Mike, are you an idiot? Just cut the thing in half. That's what you do. There's obviously a solution there. I said, well, absolutely, that would be a solution. But that's unpack that. So we do cut the orange in half, and I give one half to the one person and the other half to the other. And the man, he takes his half of the orange and he goes over and he's got one of those little grater things, and he starts taking the zest off the orange and the rind, and he's flavoring a pie with it. And the lady takes the other half and she goes over to the counter and she's got one of those juicer things, and she pushes down the orange and kind of squeezing out the orange juice and then pouring it into a cup and having a lovely drink of fresh orange juice, her favorite thing. So did we need to cut the orange in half? As part of a healthy conflict management system, we need to be able to negotiate with each other and look to resolving a self-help level before having to take it to someone else. In that scenario, if we had simply been curious, I wonder. So I'm curious. Bill, I'm curious, why do you want this orange? Well, I actually just want some of the rind on the outside because I want to use it for a pie. Well, why are you so passionate about that? Well, it's how my grandma used to make it. It just makes me feel so good remembering her. Mary, over here, you're passionate about orange because I love orange juice. I just love orange juice. So whenever I see an orange, I want it. So if we've been curious, would we ever have had to cut the orange in half? Ultimately, yes, I know, to get the orange juice out. I appreciate that, but not all of the orange juice. So the success of a conflict management system that empowers self-help will be directly connected to the level of empowerment, confidence, and trust evident in the organization. So in this case, without negotiating and being curious, without expectations, both parties got some of what was available, but neither got their best, did they? They got half best. A healthy conflict management system will implement a clearly defined negotiating process that protects relationships. A healthy conflict management system will implement self-awareness tools that increase the confidence necessary to enter into a difficult conversation. You know those ones I'm talking about? The hard ones, the emotional ones. the critical ones. Healthy conflict management system will implement team awareness tools that provide a platform for curiosity to be safe, but to be empowered and to be confident and to be trusted. When these tools are implemented and work together in a healthy conflict management system, then I say the levels of empowerment and confidence and trust just go right out the window. It's amazing how fast they take off. Part of any healthy conflict management system includes developing EQ, emotional intelligence, which we would call the science of people, and then fully integrating it into what we call EW, which is emotional wisdom, which is the art of relationships. You need to put the science from a transactional place into the art of relationships, into the relational piece. Some of the EQ diagnostics we see as valuable for increasing emotional wisdom include personality profiles, appreciation languages, conflict management styles, learning styles, social styles, to mention a few. We use a lot of those in different companies, on onboarding processes and overall development of their conflict management system. We integrate emotional wisdom into organizational culture and desired outcome with specific workshops, seminars, retreats, as well as our leadership coaching and team-based coaching programs, some of which you're seeing on that slide right now. So, okay, so let me jump into that workplace wellness survey. You okay with that? So I want to just cover some of that, and it we've looked at this idea that there's unhealthy and there's healthy conflict. That fear is a real thing, and it's a huge bottleneck. We don't deal with it, we just let it manifest. It's going to kill us. It's going to kill our companies, and we need to be intentional about building structure and system around how we're going to be prepared with preparation for a self-help platform for healthy conflict to come out of an organization and not be taken hostage by that unhealthy conflict. So looking at this workplace wellness survey, we are able to see a little glimpse of what our existing conflict management system looks like, and kind of based on, we would say, your organizational wellness. We work closely with the Workplace Fairness Institute when undertaking workplace wellness surveys and assessments. And then we undertake the prescribed recommendations as well for improving an organization's conflict management system, something we'd love to talk to you about. But the workplace wellness survey you have completed is the basis of workplace health theory that suggests there are 6 levels of organizational health, and at each level, the effectiveness of your conflict management system is revealed. Of the 6 levels, level 6 is the most effective for a healthy conflict management system. And most interesting, at the 3 levels, 1, 2, and 3, when left to their own devices, those low 3 levels will continue to self-destruct. They're on their own. They don't have a capacity to really get to a positive place because they are destructive in their nature. However, levels 4, 5, and 6 have an inherent capacity to be constructive. When they're practiced and when there's coaching built around it, they will continue to compound and build on themselves. And so, where did you score? If you had a chance to you came up with a number, and you have come up with a number somewhere between 10 and 100. And where did you score? And just kind of, I'm going to throw a couple of questions out for you to sort of think about. The first question is, were you surprised at where you scored, in terms of whether it's high or low, and why? If you haven't made notes about this, I really encourage you to do that, just to write this down. And if you haven't had a chance to share some of this with some of your team leaders, this would be great stuff to enter into one of those courageous conversations I was talking about. So surprise should always be followed with curiosity. What did we learn about curiosity? The idea of pausing and to be curious and to say, I wonder why this is happening. I wonder what's contributing to this score being high or this score being low. Great place to engage your curiosity, and in particular with the rest of your team. The second question is, did you see, while answering the questions, areas you could work on right away? We often, clients' experience has been that they get one of those aha moments in the survey as the questions posed arguably bring different illumination to a situation. You just suddenly see something different. So if you have, make sure you capture that, circle it, don't lose it, and have a conversation around that as well. Make sure you write them down, make sure you share them, and make sure that you're curious. Big deal. Otherwise, as soon as you get off this call, there's going to be 100 things you probably need to do. If you haven't captured that, you're going to lose it. So let's look at the scores that are identified in the 6 levels, kind of what they reveal, and a couple of recommendations for each of them. And we'll start with the lowest scores. So the lowest being that active destructive category. And essentially that entire culture change, the whole culture will need to be changed. It's not something you can do some modifications to. There'll be a struggle with vision. There'll be competing visions. There'll be competing goals. There'll be strategies that are self-serving, and some of them that are trying to derail other people or other things, and tactics to support that. It'll be a very difficult place. Intervention would be happening all the time in that organization. And so what we really talk about in that is, if you're in that category, you're down there, the great news right now is that you're on this webinar. That's awesome. Congratulations for being here. And now you have a great opportunity. All of us do, when we look at this chart, have opportunity to move ourselves up in our conflict management system and our workplace wellness. This one, it's really kind of coming in and completely realigning organizational structure to systemic culture, and then to the actual dynamic of the people. In the passive destructive, that bottom line is probably the biggest thing. Is that there's a struggle between, am I focused on my return on shareholders, my return on investment exclusively, or is there a piece there that is connected to my people? You think of companies that get caught up in just focusing on that bottom line just for the economic return, and they wonder why they have such a high turnover. That'll happen in here. And there are systems and structures in place, but they're more aligned to probably stakeholder and shareholder value than the actual people that are delivering whatever the products are. The reactive destructive is, and in a recommendation in passive destructive, they're systems that are working really well. It's just that they become unbalanced, and we have to realign them and try and realign that transactional relational space. The reactive destructive, most people in the organization, if they were polled on a survey, they'd say they'd all have different senses of how fair or unfair the company was. Fairness is probably is not stabilized. There's probably people that feel it's fair based on their personality type, because they can check boxes off, and then there's people who feel it's completely unfair because people are being left out of the circle and not included, and a whole myriad of other implications. In this case, it's more about an HR structure. It's more about saying, okay, so let's go back to our basics of who our people are, who they are and why they matter, and look at our HR as far as how do we build a fairness system that fully engages and fairly engages beyond the regulatory and governmental structure of an organization. And that is where a conflict management system assessment starts to come into play there. In the fourth category, the reactive constructive, now we're moving into that progressively moving upwards direction. There is systems for dealing with conflict. It's probably hit and miss. There is probably a hit and miss on fairness. And there'll be some other challenges. There'll probably be certain areas of the company they just seem to be, there's a group that just got it all together and are moving really well and sync together, and others not so much. And that's going to really just be about that, again, that there's not clarity of offer is the term that jumps to mind, that there's not a clear understanding what really is the conflict management system. What does that really look like? And we have to move from a place of just firefighting to actually being strategic in development. Preventative, constructive, again, you guys, that's where I would say we are as a company. I think a lot of companies, we have some good structure. We have mechanisms for dealing with unhealthy conflict. We have mechanisms for engaging healthy conflict, that we're continually reviewing those systems, and we're always looking for ways of improving it. The key here is review. The key here is continuous improvement. And the key is, are your people fully engaged in the journey with you? It's not a top-down directive and more of a bottom-up process. And holistic constructive, well, if you're there, I should stop talking, and we need to hear from all of you guys, because I don't know how to do that. Not yet, but I'm learning. I'm working at it. And it's really, if you're a company that you're in that category, I just really encourage you to reach out to others that would love to be there with you. And it's about continuous improvement. You guys have got that nailed. It's about constant review, that with a participatory leadership culture, that people feel fully engaged, fully empowered, and fully inspired. So those are kind of the 6 levels that we look at, and you'll score, as I said, your score will have landed in there. And the idea is to move it up. This is an indicator. This is not a test or a judgment thing. It's an indicator. It's just an idea of where you're at. And so a healthy conflict management system is critical for turning conflict into profit. Remember, that was the title of this workshop, kind of some of that crazy talk. Maybe I'm not as crazy as you thought. So in our time together, you know, we now know the difference between unhealthy conflict and healthy conflict, and how it can work for us or take us hostage. We've looked at the fear of conflict, its dangerous impact on people and organizations, and explored why fear happens and how we can be intentional, there it is, with taking a pause and being curious with, I wonder about it. We've now looked at how we're currently doing with our organization's conflict management system, and where there are areas of improvement for our workplace wellness. You'll recall I said at the outset that every organization and every person has a conflict management system. Well, today we've explored the organizational conflict management system, and we're going to give you a diagnostic to look at your personal conflict management system. We're going to provide that to you after the workshop, and it's going to help you better understand your personal conflict capacity and give you some tools to increase it. Sound interesting? So an email will be sent out to you from CFIB following the workshop, where you'll be able to get your copy, do the diagnostic, and here's the picture of what it looks like. And that's what you'll see. Now, as part of this survey, we'd like to offer you on a complimentary basis a 30-minute coaching session to discuss the outcome of that survey, your workplace wellness survey, talk about the results, maybe help you along with some ideas to increase your workplace wellness and your personal conflict capacity. Okay, so let's bring this webinar home and make sure we have time for your questions. You know, my goal today was to provide you with a fresh perspective on conflict, both healthy and unhealthy, a look at how conflict impacts you and your organization, and some immediately applicable steps that, as our title suggested, maybe not so crazy anymore, turn conflict into profit. I hope I've accomplished this, and I can't wait to dig into for you guys to dig into your notes. And if you need some help, well, Legendary Coaching is just an email or text or a phone call away. So, kind of in closing, the benefits of a healthy conflict management system. Well, we believe a healthy conflict management system will deliver what we've talked about, is this idea of prosperity, a prosperous bottom line that will protect relationships, advance emotional fairness, empowers pride of ownership, invests in physical wellness, and you know what? Makes a lot more money for everyone. In the notes you've been given in the attachments, you'll see that there's a conflict profit checklist that you might find that will help you be intentional with your conflict management system. So I'm going to shift gears here now. I want to turn this back over to Sylvie and enjoy a question and answer period with you.
Great, thank you so much. So before I just get into the questions, I just want to remind everyone, if you haven't had a chance to grab the documents that Michael was referring to, there's a panel that should be on your screen. If you can't see that panel, please use the orange arrow. And within that panel, there's a section called handouts, where you will see 3 of 5, and that's where you can capture all these documents that we've been discussing. So we do have a couple of questions, and the very first one is, can you give us an example of healthy conflict? I'm having trouble with this concept.
Healthy conflict? So,
yes.
I think the easiest definition for healthy conflict is the ability to passionately disagree without taking it personally. So let me explain what I mean by that. So let's take what it isn't. So have you ever been in a conversation where suddenly I have an opinion and you have an opinion, and all of a sudden we start talking about that, whatever that issue is. Well, let's make it. I think every cup should be blue, and you think every cup should be red. And we suddenly said, "Oh no!" But have you ever noticed that at some point that conversation shifts from being about the color of the cups to being personal? It starts to become a personal attack on the other person. Well, of course you would say they should be red because you're red stupid or something like that. The reality is, what happens is what we thought is principles and personalities get blended together. And then what happens is when the conflict escalates. There's 5 levels of conflict escalation, and in that journey, it goes from from being one person to another person. Ultimately, that person starts to, if there's a group of people, say, don't you think he's an idiot talking about this color blue? And all of a sudden, he starts rallying people, and suddenly you have a whole, that's how world wars get started, over rivers and water and things like that, that are an escalation of a particular issue. But the key to it is it became personal. And so the idea is that healthy conflict is that I could passionately have a conversation that would really be about me curious about why are you so passionate about that blue cup? Tell me more. Why is that so important? And what ends up happening in healthy conflict is we move from a position. If you think of an iceberg and you think of the exposed portion as being the position, and then the 2/3 that are underwater are kind of what we would call the underlying interests. So those are the needs, desires, concerns, and fears. And so that's what happens is a person has the position, I want the blue cup, but it's being informed by those underlying things. And when I'm curious about it, say, well, why are you so passionate about blue cup? Well, I just have to have a blue cup because it's my grandmother always had a blue cup, or I always had this, or my dad had that. And so when we get to that, we can actually, with the underlying interest, if we're actually curious about it, if we're asking questions, that can be a very healthy conversation, healthy conflict that actually brings out a deeper, more rooted reason for the blue cup that can actually have a collaborative outcome. That's what we talk about. The idea of getting a win-win outcome is that if I understand your underlying interests and you understand mine, we can find common ground there that we don't have to take it personally, but we can agree to move forward on. And so when that happens in an organization, I can disagree with a discussion that's happening in an organization. I always think of the ones that I've always wondered about. I think of the challenges that Volkswagen had, and with the whole issue of getting caught lying to the customer and integrity being a core value. And there would have been somebody at that table that would have wanted to say, is that really who we are, and that kind of thing. But it didn't. I don't think that there was a place for that kind of healthy conflict, because there wasn't an empowerment or trust or confidence to ask that kind of question, for maybe fear of losing your job or whatever that might look like. So healthy conflict is really where we're able to passionately have a conversation, be curious, but not move it to a personal level. It becomes an attack on the other person. So what we talk about is we're hard on the principle and we're soft on the people.
Okay, so we have another question here. We know a common workplace conflict is related to compensation. Employees want to have a pay increase, but the employer has limitations to meet that expectation. How would you handle that type of conflict?
So could you, the very start of that, Sylvie, you just broke up for a second there.
Yeah, sure. So we know that a common workplace conflict is related to compensation. Employees want to have a pay increase, however, employers have limitations to meet that expectation. How would you handle that type of conflict?
Well, it's a great question, and it's for all of us. We all deal with that. For me, I'm not. I guess I would put it that it's about not being afraid to have the conversation, because I don't necessarily, because I have a conversation doesn't mean I have to do everything. And so as an owner, it's about me. So I'm curious. Tell me why I'm going to come back to that place that you're going to hear me. I use it all the time. We use it in our coaching. I'm just curious why you're passionate about an increase. And they'll say, well, I need the money, or I need this. Or quite often, though, when we start doing, but if I find out from people what really is their passion, sometimes it is an absolute pay increase that they just want, that everybody across the board is looking for 10%. And say, well, listen, what I've heard you guys say is you all want an increase of the equivalent of somewhere between 10 and 20%. And quite frankly, we're not in a position at this point in time to do that. But with all your feedback and input, we're going to try and do something, but it's going to have to be a little something smaller. But we're going to keep checking in with you as we move forward. The sense that they're valued and heard, they didn't get the increase. Well, they may still not be satisfied, and they may still want to look for work elsewhere. But we find most of the time when people are valued and heard, it's the number one reason people leave companies. When you actually just find out, because often they don't necessarily want a direct pay increase. It might just be that they need more. They need more flexibility with their time for a daycare issue. They might need something. They're just looking for a different kind of structure and a break. And it's not about it. It allows people to suddenly participate in it. This is where the empowerment piece comes in, where they feel empowered in the decision, even though they don't have control over it. Aren't going to say yes or no, but they feel more empowered in the process, and they become more open to understand the current position of the company and understand that where the company is, and they feel that there is opportunity, or they don't and they leave. But to me, that's it's usually because we don't want to have the conversation, because we don't want to, we'd say, I don't want to open up that box. That's just going to be a big mess if I say, oh, well, let's talk about pay raise. Everybody's going to want more money. Well, that is your short route that we were talking about, because that's what you've seen before. That's what you experienced somewhere before. Maybe it was in a previous position. Maybe it was for yourself or whatever that was. But that's not necessarily the case. You don't know that that's the case yet until you ask those questions, until you're curious, until you find out what those underlying issues could be, what those needs and desires and concerns are. And when people just feel that you care for them that way, they want to care more for you. That's where the trust, the empowerment, the confidence starts to grow.
Okay, we have time for one last question, and it's a very good one. How do you mitigate a conflict between two employees that have degraded? In other words, they won't even speak to each other, and everybody's walking around on eggshells.
Well, there's a real short answer. You just need you need me to come in and facilitate a conversation. That's what we do. That's funny. It's that is, and how often, I'm sure people listen, how many companies is there other people right now that are probably on this call that have that situation? That's a very common situation, because we don't know what to do with it. I'm not equipped to deal with that. And now it's gone to DEFCON, whatever. How do you deal with this thing? Well, what we often do in organizations, and really if there's two parties that have become entrenched in their position, are not communicating at all, and they become toxic to other employees, then that probably requires external input. When I have different clients in health industries and some of the areas we work in with in our mediation and facilitation, as we say, a facilitated conversation is simply if they are unwilling to have a conversation with a third party that is neutral, like a mediator, or as I say, a facilitated conversation is way less threatening, then there's another problem, because that toxicity that's in your company is going to continue to get worse. It's not going to get better. But if they're willing to have that conversation, and someone like me would come along and have a conversation with each one individually, and then have a meeting with them together, we would basically do what I just described. We would go to those underlying issues. We'd look to see if we could find common ground that they could establish a communication plan to move forward on. We do it in union environments, non-union environments, small, big companies all the time. But you don't need me to do that. But what we do is usually equip one person in every organization, and it's not necessarily the owners of the company. It's the person that's best suited for this to become the manager mediator, to become some kind of an internal party. It's a balance, because there's a power that can very quickly be a power imbalance in that. But quite often, by having somebody in-house that becomes that person that is that facilitated conversation. We always say when we come into a company that as soon as we come into a company, the fear of conflict leaves the building. And people say that's not possible because I'm still afraid. I said, well, because we're going to deal with all the messy conflict that there is, and clean that up, and then show one of your folks or a couple of your folks how to continue to do that. And then we're going to show you how to invest in the healthy stuff. But it's just each of those questions, Sylvie, those are very common. Those are common things we see. And the key is not to be paralyzed with your short route, to take that step. It's the idea of processing this from a place of curiosity. How much expectation have I got in front of this? I just know this thing's going to turn around if I do this, but what does it look like to just actually be curious, ask a couple questions. Sometimes it's involving getting one other person that you can trust, that you can have a conversation with. Quite frankly, for me, sometimes it's my wife, because she brings a whole different perspective to my day. But it's just having a voice to give you some, and it's almost not that they're going to give you any answers. It just allows you to sound that out. So just don't leave it there, because it will not get better. It will not get better unless they leave, which is not necessarily solve the problem, because then everyone's wondering why they left and when they're next.
Okay, that's all the time we have for questions. So back to you, Michael.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Sylvie. Thank you for each of you for investing your time with me today. I hope some of this has got you thinking, got your curiosity going, got you thinking about being intentional. I hope you'll have some sound bites you can grab and run with, and just try and do something different today that you've heard that will really start to create a difference today for yourself or your organization. It all starts with the idea, the best time to plant a tree was arguably 20 years ago. The next best time is today. So I hope that you'll apply some of the things you've been able to hear today, and we'd be delighted to unpack that more with you. Thank you to CFIB for including me as part of your professional development platform, and thank you, Sylvie, for being such an amazing moderator. And our team at Legendary Coaching is looking forward to being part of your journey on building a healthy conflict management system, helping you with coaching, helping you turn, now you probably can agree with me, turning conflict into profit. And I'm just going to close with just a saying we like around here. It's about influential leaders. And we define influential leaders, which I'm going to go ahead and say all of you are. An influential leader is somebody who gives somebody something they don't even know they need or want. But once they have it, they can't imagine living without it. And then they can't wait to give it away. Isn't that just the desire of all of our hearts as leaders, is to make somebody else's, my ceiling, somebody else's floor, to just find their gold. And so influential leaders in our world are intentional with healthy conflict management systems, both personally and organizationally, that resolve unhealthy conflict and empower healthy conflict. And we always attach two questions to that. First of all, what's in your system? And second, how can we help you? Thank you so much for allowing me to be part of your day.
Thank you. And just a reminder, any questions that were unanswered, we will follow up with you individually. Have a great day, and we will now end the webinar.